Welcome to Mana's Seal YouTube channel. The previous video link is on the description box or on the top right card. Volume 13, The Paladin of the Holy Kingdom. Neia drew another arrow from her quiver. She was doing it like it was nothing, like it could not be helped. Was she a master archer like her father now? Her bowmanship had rapidly improved during the course of this battle. That was how she had managed to kill Jajan, though the latter had been wounded during the battle with the paladin. Amidst the chaos of war, Neia sought new prey to bring down. I'm an archer, so why aren't they targeting me? That question was answered as her next arrow pierced another demi-human skull. Don't approach that human carelessly. She's wearing the Grand King's armor. The Grand King. Grand King Busser. Grand King Busser's armor. Neia's sensitive ears caught the chatter which the demi-humans exchanged. No doubt about it. That's Busser's armor. Don't tell me that human brought down. Ah. Is it when the Sorcerer King said it would protect me? Was he not referring to the armor's ability to defend against ranged attacks, but the reputation of defeating Busser? The Grand King Busser's name was well known throughout the demi-human forces. Therefore, the demi-humans who had mounted the wall were under the false impression that they were fighting the warrior who had defeated Busser. The fact that Neia had killed a leader-class demi-human in one shot only added to that. That was why they refused to advance against her, even though they knew Neia was an archer. I have to hand it to the Sorcerer King. Did he take this into account as well? In all likelihood, few demi-humans would chase her now even if she turned tail and ran. They would probably prioritize holding their ground over chasing a strong foe, even if they were making a mistake. Therefore, Neia's life was probably in no great danger. The Sorcerer King's advice to flee to the East Gate suddenly came to mind, but she could not do it after all. Anyone like that would never have come here in the first place. Neia loosed another arrow, and killed another demi-human. Ooh. That glare again. Glare, well, I am looking at them. It's the eyes of someone who hungers for slaughter. That female human, at least, I think it's probably a female. She's no ordinary enemy. Probably, a female. Look at that bow. It's amazing. It's not just her skills. The mad-eyed archer. Eh? What do you mean by that name? Do you know that human? No. Does that female human have a nickname? Hang on. I once heard there was a human archer with a devil's face and amazing skills with the bow. Could that be it? That was Dad. The mad-eyed archer. The archer who killed Busser. For some reason, the phrase mad-eyed archer spread through the demi-human ranks like a wave. They've already decided it. As that thought ran through her mind, Neia no longer had any opportunity to correct them. As Neia loosed her arrows, the militiamen began moving. Everyone, hold the line. Don't let the demi-humans near that girl. Oh. Form ranks. Remember your training. I'm moving up. About 20 militiamen moved to act as shields for her. Just kill those bastards for us. We'll protect you. Got it. The sound of flapping wings came from the enemy encampment. Neia pivoted and pointed her arrow at the source of the sound. Her eyes were filled with the sight of pteropuses rising from the enemy formation. There were many of them. While it seemed as though bypassing the wall should have been their objective, several of them dove from the flock and descended on Neia. She had long since abandoned the thought of who to aim at. In this silent, pure white world where all she could see were her enemies, Neia calmly loosed an arrow at each and every one of her enemies. Her shooting was inhuman, unhesitating in its mechanical precision. After downing the pteropuses heading at her, Neia exhaled lightly. She could hear again after being released from that state of hyperfocus. To the side. She wanted to dodge, but a torrent of pain came from her left arm. The armor beside her had torn her arm apart. Gwarg. Despite her cry of pain, Neia still made to pull out another arrow, but then she thought that she might not be able to properly brace her bow. In that case, perhaps drawing her sword might be better. Her hesitation was a huge weakness, and the savage-looking armor raised its arm, preparing to follow up on its previous attack with a strike to the face. She wanted to backstep, but her opponent was a superior fighter, and managed to close the distance to her, so she could not evade it. Intense pain filled her face. While she had managed to turn her head and thus avoided having her eyes shredded, the claws had ripped through her left cheek and opened a wound that exposed the interior of her mouth. Fresh blood filled her mouth, and the taste of blood spread over her tongue. In addition, she could feel her warm blood oozing from her cheek, the sensation spreading down her neck and chest. Neia had no time to draw her sword, and so she slammed Ultimate Shooting Star Super into the armor's face. The armor had probably not expected her to do that with the bow, so it tried to back up to avoid the attack. Since she could not move her left arm well enough to brace her bow, Neia drew her sword with her right arm. Neia performed a ramming stab like she was prepared to die for it. The armor immediately countered with razor-sharp claws, but a nearby militiaman had wounded its leg, and its aim was off. The claw missed her ear by a fraction of an inch, and in turn her steel blade sank into the armor's throat. She glanced down to the armor as it collapsed and then surveyed the situation. While she had been focusing on loosing arrows, the militiamen on the wall had been almost completely wiped out. The demi-humans had reached Neia, and there were only 5 more men remaining, all pressed close to the wall. The nearest reinforcements were fighting on the other side of the demi-humans who had scaled the ladders, and they would be hard-pressed to help her over here. Frankly speaking, they seemed to be engaged in melee, so they would not have the free time to come help her. There were over 30 demi-humans in Neia's block, and there were only 6 people on her side. Neia glared at the demi-humans and they backed off. The pressure on Neia and the others eased a little. Sorry about that, Baraja-san. The militiaman who had been pressed to the wall took a defensive formation in front of Neia. We won't let those bastards past us, even if it's the last thing we do. The person who said this looked like a cowardly man in his 40s, with an unhealthy protruding gut. However, his face was flushed with what seemed like the excitement of battle, and his body was covered in so much blood that one could not tell if it was his or the enemy's. Even so, he refused to kneel, standing tall with an indomitable spirit. He certainly looked like a reliable warrior. Thank you very much, Neia said as she spat out a mouthful of fresh blood which had pooled there. Then, she continued, I'll leave this to you. He was not the only one who was like this. None of the fallen militiamen showed any sign that they had attempted to leave the perimeter they had formed around Neia. What else could she say except that she trusted them? The man's eyes went to Neia's left arm, and his face stiffened. I can see the bone. Please don't say that, it hurts a lot when you point it out. Sorry. Once one reached a certain degree of skill as a paladin, they would be able to use low-tier recovery spells. However, Neia was only a squire, so she could not do so. There were no paladins or priests by Neia's side, and her mana had not yet recovered enough to use the magic item again. It would probably be best to abandon the thought of using her left arm in this battle. Neia glared at the demi-humans, but just moving her eyeballs made the wound on her face ache. The pain made her gaze that much more ominous, and as the demi-humans felt it, they went on their guard. Thanks to your shots, nobody else made it up here like that guy just now, Baraja-san. It's because of you that we managed to survive this long. If the demi-humans before Neia's eyes rushed them all at once, the militiamen would probably be routed in an instant. However, they were all wary of Neia the archer, so they could not move together. In truth, she could understand their caution once she heard what the demi-humans were saying. The mad-eyed archer, could it be that she's nothing much with a sword? Don't get careless, she's just pretending she can't use a sword to throw her opponents off. Really? You're a real smart guy. Should we get the snakeman over and kill her from a distance with spears? Neia laughed in her heart. It would seem that she had gained quite an undeserved reputation, thanks to the power of the magic bow she had borrowed. Is there hope for me? Neia asked herself that question quietly enough that the demi-humans could not hear, and then she laughed. If it's the bow I borrowed from His Majesty, the Ultimate Shooting Star Super, shooting wouldn't be a problem, but... The man tried saying the name Ultimate Shooting Star Super, and then he laughed forlornly. I see, so it's very bad, huh? Say, Baraja-san, you jump down from the wall and flee. You should live on. Neia looked at the man. Forgive me. It's only natural for you to be angry at such foolish words. Well, I don't know what sort of hell you've gone through, you're around my daughter's age. I think, but letting a girl like that die is just. I wasn't angry, I was just looking normally at you. The thought crossed her mind, but this was a common thing by now, and Neia did not take offense at it. The man was speaking the truth. It would be wiser to fall back for the time being, and heal her wounds until she could use her bow, rather than swing a sword she was not used to. What'll happen to them if I do that? I know very well. I can't help them even if I stay and fight. I'll just die for nothing. Neia swept the bow in her left hand down and to the side. I need to return this weapon. There are many reasons why I should run. But what will His Majesty's enemies think if I run away while I'm wielding a weapon that he lent me? In that case, how could I run? She bellowed. How could I, as one who holds a weapon borrowed from His Majesty, turn and run? She tightly gripped the sword in her right hand. Repaying one's obligations was only natural for a human being. The people of this country specifically, the head of their paladins, were not the sort to do that, but she wanted to show the Sorcerer King that not everyone in this country was like them. Awa. Neia's shout sounded like she was wailing. Since she could not use her bow, the militiamen would die for nothing protecting her. In that case, she ought to take advantage of the demi-humans' mistaken fear of her power and attack, while they could not bring their might to bear. The enemy had probably not expected Neia to charge so many enemies, and they moved slowly enough that even Neia's meager swordsmanship was enough to cut them up. The remaining militiamen behind Neia followed her lead. Neia swung her sword. It bounced off, and the demi-humans swung at her open body, only to have their attacks deflected by Buster's armor. Neia thrust her sword. She stabbed into a demi-human's body, and when she pulled it out, its organs followed. Before that demi-human hit the ground, another demi-human's claws struck at Neia's face. The wound on her left cheek was followed by one on her right, and the blood which flowed out got into her eyes. Intense pain filled her legs. A demi-human drove his dagger deep into flesh. One of the militiamen fell. Sword swung. 2 more militiamen went down. 1 demi-human collapsed. All the militiamen were dead. There were nothing but enemies in front of her and to her sides. Her breathing was ragged, and her heartbeat irritated her. The parts of her body which had been struck by the enemy blazed hot, and every time she moved them, waves of seizing pain filled Neia with agony. I'm scared. Neia was afraid. She was going to die, and the thought of that frightened her. She had been prepared to die here. The enemy outnumbered them several times to 1, and their individual fighting power was superior as well. The enemy had all the advantages, and the only advantage her side had was their defensive position. That being the case, it would be stranger if she did not die. Still, looking death in the eye was terrifying even if she had prepared herself for it beforehand. The word "escape" set by the person she deeply respected echoed through her mind. Though she was prepared to die, she still wanted to live. Neia had once thought about what would happen when people died. What would the moment of her extinction be like? Her soul would return to the great flow, where the gods would judge her, and those who did good as written in the scriptures would go to a land of eternal rest, while the wicked would be delivered into a land of torment. Still, even if she had accumulated good deeds throughout her life with the aim of reaching her eternal rest, she was afraid to face the end of her life. She swung her sword. That powerless strike could not possibly slay a foe in 1 hit. Anyone attacking even when surrounded would take vicious counterattacks from the enemy. The sword pierced Neia's armor and cut into her. Neia was still alive thanks to the armor which the Sorcerer King had lent her. She would have died long ago without it. Indeed, she would have become a corpse like the countless dead militiamen and civilians who had been scattered throughout the city, like they had been carelessly thrown away. I must be in really bad shape. Neia laughed at herself for being able to think about such inappropriate things, even as she was this close to the afterlife. Her feet slipped due to the force of her swing. Her left thigh seized up and her right thigh was injured and could not hold her upright. She lost her balance and fell. She leaned against the battlements, but it was all she could do not to collapse. The world was turning white and cloudy, and she could hear a distant wheezing panting. It was an annoying sound. She wondered who was making it, and realized that it was herself. She was at her limit. Neia was going to die. Just a bit more and the mad-eyed archer will be dead. All together now. The voices of the demi-humans came from far away. This is a real pain. Neia could no longer tell what the demi-humans were saying. However, they were probably not singing her praises. As her thoughts scattered into the void, a part of her mind thought only of things like that. She was simply waving the sword she held. Her attacks were meant to keep the enemy at bay. I'm so scared, but everyone is waiting for me. In that white and cloudy world, she saw the smiles of her mother, her father, and her friends from her home village. Who are they? Buchan, Mochan, Danny. I'm scared, Your Majesty. Her lungs and her heart and her arms and her brain wanted to rest. Neia could no longer resist that temptation, but still, she had not broken yet. Why was that? She was afraid of death. She was filled with her squire's conviction to fight to the very end. Apart from this, she wanted to perform feats that were worthy of the wargear she had borrowed. The demi-human's weapons thrust out all at once, stabbing into Neia's body. And thus, Neia Baraja died.